Yeah? You don't walk somewhere, see somebody who is blind in town and assume that they need 20 bob from you. They're not begging for your help. They could be your employer. They could be your parent. They could be your sister, your sibling. They could be your leader.
Phrases like able differently are not accepted. Why? Because as a society, we want to accept the idea that it is normal to be a blind person. It is normal to be a deaf person. It is normal, to be a crippled person.
But what has been done? So far, it has never been implemented that you need to employ in public and private sectors a 5% number of people. You reserve it for people living with disabilities. Oh, sorry, persons with disabilities. Before my brother Ndong attacks me.
Hi, viewers all over the world. I'm Sheila. I'm Advocacy for Africa Girl Network. I'm a person who advocates for persons with disability in mental health and education. Today, we want to have a conversation about the Disability Act 2025. We have our guests with us. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Eugene.
Hi, my name is Ndong.
That's very nice to have you here. As you join us, we are going to present most of the things about the Disability Act 2025. So we want to know more about how the persons with disability are living everywhere in Kenya. Stay with us and watch. Remember to comment, subscribe, and like to share with other people so that you show that you care and you encourage inclusion. As we start this conversation, we see that previously in Kenya, they have approved the Disability Act 2025. Disability now, it's a law in our country. Can you see it has brought a lot of change in 2025 if you compare with the previous delegations?
Well, there has been a lot of changes. I think for starters, the act, the immediate act was enacted in 2003, and that should be 22 years now. In 2003, what we had was the previous constitution, and it lacked so many protections, especially for people living with disabilities. Around 5 years later, we had the United Nations Convention, which then provided a foundation for the protection of rights of persons with disabilities. However, 2 years later, we enacted or we promulgated our Constitution 2010. And this should show you that there's a difference between 7 years from the time when we had the 2003 Act and when we promulgated our current Constitution 2010. You would note that today it's 2025. We are talking about this Act at least 15 years later. It does not mean that the issue of disability has not been important. It's been there. It's a conversation that we've had. However, implementation has been the main challenge from the government. Again, another issue has been we haven't necessarily aligned the Act, the 2003 Act, to the provisions that we have under the Constitution 2010. So that is where the problem is. And I'd like to see how our conversation really delves deeply into some of these details. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with my brother Eugene that the issue of disability has been with us for quite a while. In terms of the law, the 2003 law was passed way before we had a constitution that came up with so many changes, especially if you look at Article 54, of the Constitution of Kenya, for the first time. I think we've had several constitutions. We've had the independence constitutions. We've had the constitution during the Moi era that went through several amendments. You'll actually notice that none of those constitutions, as a matter of fact, had a standalone provision that tells us that the persons with disabilities are actually entitled to certain legal protections. Because of that, the 2010 Constitution ushered in, for us as a country, a very, very, change-oriented kind of wave towards the persons with disabilities, where they, for the first time, they had standalone provisions, standalone provisions that deal with education issues, that deal with access to opportunities, that deal with just specific protection that is granted to them, as opposed to the general protection that is granted by the Constitution to everyone. And I think that shows that for the first time we had special attention towards persons with disabilities. Now, despite that being the case, you will notice that every right that is enshrined in a constitution has a legislation or an act that is passed by the National Assembly to give it life, to breathe life to it. The challenge we've had with Persons with Disabilities Act is that the act that has been in existence was passed by Parliament way before we had the 2010 Constitution. So the necessity of having the 2025 Persons with Disability Act is one that is welcome, not just with persons with disabilities, but also to the general public, because for the first time we are bringing it into conformity. We are saying the Constitution came, and reordered the manner in which things are being done. And therefore, we also need an act that speaks the same language with the Constitution. So I think the 2025 Persons with Disability Act is a welcome act because it reorders, it changes the manner in which we've perceived, the issues of persons with disabilities, and it also gives special attention. You see, there is a good reason why a special attention needs to be given to persons with disabilities. If you look at Article 27 of the Constitution, of the current Constitution, it unshackles the issue of discrimination, that nobody needs to be discriminated on any grounds, including disability. Disability is specifically a ground. So I think it was time we had a standalone provision, we had a standalone law that tells us how do we meet the constitutional goal of ensuring that persons with disabilities are protected within this country. So yes, it is a welcome move. The question of implementation is one that I think will be a discussion going forward. But as we have seen with several other acts, that we pass very good laws, but we do not follow laws with funding, because that is one issue that has always been there, that laws are passed without funding, when we are supposed to first plan and see if we are going to pass a new law and we are going to bring new things that needs funding, have we also organized the question of funding, especially with persons with disabilities? I think that's an area that the 2025 Act will either benefit negatively or positively, depending with how much resources we have put in place.
That's so great and awesome. We have learned that the Act 2025 and the Act of 2010, we have difference. So it is catering for persons with disability, and we think 2025 will be beneficiary for persons with disability. So it means that we have to work hand in hand with 2025 so that we can work together. That is so awesome. The next time, I want to ask you, do we think this Act 2025, which has been put in the law, this Act can protect persons with special needs, especially the women, where we have conflicts, maybe, for example, violence, in the law, we have the act and it is there. Do you think it will protect women with disability?
Well, I think that protection is catered for. The only thing I need to say about that is there is a perception on how persons with disabilities are being handled. And I will draw the two categories. The old school or old model of disability, which those who have studied disability will tell you it's called the health model. It's the health model because it looks at disability as the problem that needs to be cured. That's the old model. It doesn't look at the disability as a condition that is a normal condition. It looks at it, in terms of we need to rectify, we need to cure. Then there is a new model, which I think is the model that the 2025 also seeks to do. It is called the society model. What the society model seeks to say is that persons with disabilities can be given an enabling environment within the society to coexist. That it is the society that is a problem. It is not the persons with disability themselves. And that distinction is important because the old model simply asked the question, what can, for instance, can we give deaf persons? Can we give them hearing aids? That is exactly what it seeks to. That is what it focuses. That is what it mainly looks at. If it's the blind, it asks, can we give them walking aids? That is the old model. So the old model looks at persons with disability as the problem, as a defect. It looks at it as a deformity. But the new model, which is the social model, asks the question, how can we change the society to look at persons with disability as normal people that, if given an enabling environment, would do the very same things, so that we don't look at it as a defect. Now, the reason why women then become a special attention is because within it, there are also cultural norms. There are also cultural norms that not only affect persons with disability generally, but also affect women more. That is what is called intersectionality, and I'll be able to explain what intersectionality means. Women are already marginalized as women, but women now with disabilities are now marginalized as second. That is now a second factor. So there are two factors. Women are already in a special category because we know that the historical marginalization that they have had. But now women who now are persons with disability are now marginalized by a second layer, not by just virtue of being women, but by virtue of the disability. So the 2025 Act mixes the two methods. The two methods are good. It is good to offer protection in terms of hearing aids, walking aids, but at the same time, it is good to change the societal manner of view with persons with disability. That 2025 Act does not focus on a single model like the old Act. The old Act was asking the question of how can we have infrastructure that helps these people cope. The new Act goes ahead to ask another question. How can we shape society in a manner that society is the problem? If society, for instance, if you go to an institution and find that they only have steep stairs, the old model will say, this is what the old model will say. The old model will say the person with disability is not able to climb up the stairs. That is what the old model will say. The new model, which I call the societal model, will say, no, the problem is the institution. They have not been able to provide a path, a ramp, because if they do, then it brings the ability of the person with disability. Their ability come up, because then they are able to use the space. They are able to move like normal people do. That is what the 2025 Act seeks to do. You will find that for women, which is a special category, it gives the government a mandate to ensure that first funding, special funding and attention is given to women, despite the entire group of persons with disability. More funding to persons with disability. And in that category are children, and women. That is a good shift, because the old model was simply saying, give everybody hearing aids, give everybody walking stick, without asking the question, what can we do for the society itself? Yes. So yes, women are touched.
I like what you're saying, especially when you're talking about implementation, whereby we are talking about women. We are not talking about persons with disability. I have a concern and I want to ask. Today we have more famous where women are feeling that they are not, and we are seeing that they are put there in the constitution. So we have conflict or crisis in the constitution. So we have no way of ourselves protecting ourselves. So we are talking about us getting some funds, and you are talking about women getting some funds. So the persons with disability, they only want to brand themselves, but people with disability, they don't want to come out and say that. So we cannot get funds whereby people are focusing on persons with disability. Can you get these funds, as you're telling us to look for funds and implement it?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we've had, as I said, is that we are in a country where data, statistics, don't inform policy and lawmaking processes. That's the problem. And I would tell you, in responding to the issue of funding, because if you look at countries that have developed frameworks, like the South African government, they have a framework where the blind can vote. And how did they come up with that framework? They came up with that framework because they first collected scientific data and realized that in all their years of voting, there are more blind people than any other category of persons with disabilities. Then they asked the second question: how can we allocate funding towards that process before we come up with a law? Or what funding is possible to ensure all these people that are blind vote before coming up with a legislation? That tells you that there is a disconnect. You will find we have a very good act, 2025 Persons with Disability Act. But that act has largely, been constituted with a desire that we conform it with the Constitution. But there is a funding gap. We have not asked ourselves before passing the legislation, are we able to sustain the demands that comes with the act? So the only way we are going to bridge that gap is that the issues of persons with disabilities, the nation needs to put more energy in statistics, because when you have real statistics or you have real research or data on persons with disabilities, it then informs how we are going to take care of them. If you look at the Act, one of the initiatives it actually brings or puts forth is that data, the science around persons with disabilities, the research around persons with disability, whichever category, is one thing that needs to inform future policy, making process. That is one of the new things it does create. That is the only way we are going to help. But if we pass a law first, then ask the question of funding later, then you see there is a problem. The funding, the question of how do we raise funds needs to come first, even if it doesn't have to be budgeted funding, because, we are sinking in debt as a country. It doesn't have to be budgeted funding. The country needs to ask, how do we open the channel for grants? Today, it is only civil societies and NGOs that have been left struggling to get funding for persons with disabilities. The government needs to come up and ask the question, if our budget is not able to sustain the demands of the Persons with Disabilities Act 2025, how do we assist, or in terms of external funding, in terms of grants, first, before actually we come up with the legislation? I know there actually will be regulation, which is like the child of the Persons with Disabilities Act, the child, like regulations that affect it. There will be sub-regulations, regulations and sub-regulations that affect the act. Before we even come up with those sub-regulations, the question we need to ask ourselves is, do we have an effective funding process or channel that is able to allow us to effect those? That's where the problem is.
I think just to pick up on what Ndong is saying, data and statistics has been a very, very big challenge ever since 2003 up until we got to 2010. Let me give you an example. The 2009 census that we did in Kenya said we have at least 1 million persons living with disabilities in Kenya. Remarkably, in 2019, we are now being told there are less than 900,000. Where did these people go to? So does it mean that people living with disabilities are continually dying while the other numbers for what they call normal people are increasing? That is something we need to think about. The second challenge here has been there has been a change in technology and laws and regulations across the world. Funding is not necessarily a Kenyan problem. And when the government and most stakeholders look at the issues of funding, they try to balance it against other rights. For instance, somebody would ask you, should we put X amount of money in this program to support persons living with disabilities, or should we give children food? There are people in government who think like that. Unfortunately, we don't realize that each and every segment of our society is important by its own right, and it should be funded. Funding has been a serious concern from way back in 2003, but it cannot be the only thing that can stop the implementation of this new act. For instance, the new act gives each and every state and non-state actor a role to play under the current act. The county governments considered previously that the role of collecting statistics and funding inclusion was the national government's responsibility. But under the new act, we are being told that just like the national government has a role to play, even the counties now have a role to play. That is a significant change because it shows that, one, we are trying to align the new act to what was not there in the old act and to reflect what our constitution actually expects from us. Now, to go back to the issue of women and children, our act, and really let me begin with a challenge. In most conversations around inclusivity, we tend to segment ourselves. We put it in holes, in compartments. Unfortunately, we don't realize that rights are interdependent and they're indivisible. So the enjoyment of one right or the lack of it will directly affect the enjoyment of another. And that is why women are a critical segment within our society. By virtue of being a woman in itself, is considered a challenge within our societies. When you have a woman with a disability, that becomes a higher challenge in itself. Let us look at what happens in positions of leadership. Had it not been for one of serious actors like Senator Crystal Asige, maybe we wouldn't have had the serious push for this current act. Remember, this conversation has been there since 2016. 9 years later, this is when we are signing this act. Senator Asige was nominated to Senate just the other day in 2022. So it is a very, very, what this tells us is each of us, yes, has a role to play. It begins with the civil society. It begins with each individual living with disability for us to breathe life into this act. There are some issues that we can address even without funding. Another critical issue that we need to focus on is how the judiciary then plays into this entire conversation, because people living with disabilities have faced specific challenges when it comes to accessing courts. As my brother Ndong had said earlier, the focus has been accessibility. Can you access? accessibility does not only mean physical infrastructure or just having ramps, yeah? But now we try and integrate such infrastructure into any other facility that we need to access. For instance, how many people living with physical disabilities can access our public transport system? Can you walk literally and board a matatu right now? When you board a matatu and the conductor tells you, can you read the number? Yeah? If you want to pay your fare, you are told to read the M-Pesa till or Pochi la Biashara. Can you actually do that if you have sensory disabilities? Do they understand how to sign? Our courts don't have sign interpreters. That's an issue of staffing. The judiciary can address that. We don't have enough assistive technologies. Under the initial act, that was not considered. They thought it's something peripheral. It was added as a by the way. But right now, under the new act, it's being said that compliance is mandatory. It is no longer about volunteering. The government will not give you benefits when merely because you volunteered. Now you have to put in place mechanisms to include and protect these persons living with disabilities. I think the other concern to handle before I stop on that matter is that there's a reason why we study history. History helps us understand our prejudice, our biases, the biases that we've had before. History also helps us understand where we've come from and the challenges that we've had. It helps us understand where we are currently. And based on history and our current challenges, we get to understand where we need to go. We've seen that the 2003 Act had issues. We've already seen that there was a disconnect between the 2003 Act and the 2010 Constitution. We've again seen that it's not only funding, it's not only the lack of leaders who suffer from, who not necessarily suffer, but who live with disabilities that has been a problem. We've seen the entire picture of things, and that has informed some of these specific interventions that we now have under this act. Indeed, it's true that if you have reliable data, then you can be able to understand how many people actually live with what type of disability. Did you know that under the previous act, the 2003 Act, persons living with neurodivergent disabilities, for instance, if you suffer from autism or dyslexia, they were not necessarily covered under that act. But now we are being told this is an important group of people that you need to focus on. How do you diagnose such a person? And what interventions do you then have for them? I think in the next few minutes, I'd go into some specific measures that have also been proposed for people like children within schools and within healthcare institutions, and more specifically within our criminal justice system, because it's now important. Just to cap it, that previously, policemen would just arrest anybody, just like people within public transport assume that we are all normal according to them. They would just arrest you, and there were no specific measures to protect you as an arrested person or as an accused person when you are arrested or when you're taken to court. But now under this act, we are being told that police and everybody within the justice sector must be keen enough to pay attention to these people living with disabilities. Thank you.
But I think I also need to, just before you finish, there is a it's slight yet very pronounced that I need to talk about. And I think you would hear this. You've even seen the media when they cover the stories of persons with disabilities. You've seen titles like abled differently. You've seen titles like persons living with disability. I want to tell you that is the wrong model. In the old model, which was the health model, that is what people would say. They want to say able differently because that was used to mask the real issue. The health model looks at you as the problem. And so because you are the problem, when they want to relay information about such people, they coin a language on how to go about it. That is the language you see in the 2003 Act. But if you looked at the 2025 Act, it actually says persons with disability. So the personality, the society model leaves the dignity and the person. It more concerns itself with the dignity of the person. That tells you something. That language also has a role in terms of societal initiatives. Language has a role. I would give you a demonstration. Many people have asked me, we were taught in high school and in primary, that all human beings fall within ngeli ya hour, all persons. So if it's mvulana wavulana, ngeli ya hour. But when you look at the Swahili language and the manner in which it objectifies persons with disabilities, you will see the disparity. Because many people have asked, why do we say then that a blind person is kipofu? Because then that is ngelia kivi and not mpofu. Why is the humanity being taken away? Why do we say kiziwi, and not in that? When we know that in the same curriculum, ngeli ya kivi refers to things. That simply tells you the problem. That part of this challenge is language. That is a very often, forgotten part of the conversation that this new act also brings. It also changes the language, the manner in which, so that we don't see them as things. That is why phrases like able differently are not accepted. Why? Because as a society, we want to accept the idea that it is normal to be a blind person. It is normal to be a deaf person. It is normal, to be a crippled person. If we begin saying able differently, already we are creating the distinction. The fact that you can say able differently, why not able normally? So you see that kind of distinction. So I agree with my brother that this is not just about funding. As a society, we need to change our perspective on how we look at persons with disabilities, not persons living with disability. If you say persons living with disabilities, you have made the situation permanent. You have isolated the situation, the disability, from the person. So it is persons with disability, not persons living with the disability. That is a mistake you will often hear. Or things like able differently, or ability beyond expectations. I've seen those funny things, in the media. But if you look at the new act, that is the change, where we leave the dignity of the person in their situation. We say it is the society that has a role of acceptance. It is not the person, because you see the old model, what it used to do, those with disabilities, some of them were chased away from societies. Some of them, when they looked for curative medicine, most of them were misused, in looking for curative medicine or healing. What that tells you is that at that time, we looked at disability as an isolated problem that needs to be dealt with. But the new model or the new act simply says disability is a normal. And therefore, the benefit the normal people get should apply to them. So I needed to clarify that on language. So the next time I hear my brother say persons with disabilities, we will fight, because it is persons with disabilities, not living with disabilities, not able differently. That is not the societal model.
I agree with you, Ndong. And just to add on what you said, there's this perception that people with disabilities are the other category of people. So we don't consider them as being part and parcel of the society. There's this running joke, which is not a joke, because such people deserve to be ostracized. There are still people who believe that albinos are a special category of people who should be treated differently and in some backward ways. it is something that is deeply embedded in our beliefs as a society. It is wrong. And we need to change the way we think about such things. The other day, I attended an event somewhere, and the guest speaker was one of the first commissioners in this country at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. And he said that one day he visited another country out there, and some people were treating him as if he deserved to be helped. He was being treated as if he needed to be helped. That is a very wrong way of looking at things. He didn't need to be helped. Yeah? You don't walk somewhere, see somebody who is blind in town and assume that they need 20 bob from you. They're not begging for your help. They could be your employer. They could be your parent. They could be your sister, your sibling. They could be your leader. Our good Senator, Christy Lasige, is currently doing some very, very good work in Parliament. So we need to change our way of thinking. Even without the act, it starts with self. Once we change our mindset, then we can then get to breathe life into these documents. Without changing the mindset, we will have papers like the Ndungulad Commission, which is gathering dust. Yeah? And other many good reports that the government has had that are just gathering dust. There's so many things that were even in the 2003 Act that have never been implemented. Did you know that we have a 5% employment quota that was within the 2003 Act? Isn't it a good provision? Yes, it is. But what has been done? So far, it has never been implemented that you need to employ in public and private sectors a 5% number of people. You reserve it for people living with disabilities. No, sorry, persons with disabilities, before my brother Ndong attacks me. So these are things that even while working on reforms, we are acknowledging that there are gaps that are yet to be implemented. So what can we do about it? Actually, there are people who talk about even reducing that percentage. Unfortunately, isn't it surprising that you have 5% that you have never implemented in close to 22 years? And now you're saying, since you've never implemented it, now you think about reducing. Reducing to what? I think I'll leave it at that.
Wow, amazing. It's an amazing conversation. Just imagine we have our guests who don't have disability, but they have knowledge on person with disability. As you watch, you can spread the message and to help us to the society. So thank you so much, Evans, for talking about the language that you are supposed to use when you are referring to persons with disability. It has been a challenge since we have tried our best. We have expressed ourselves or concerning the same, but we are throwing it into the deaf ears where people cannot understand. So they call us the way they want, and they don't want to call us the way we want. So I hope you have learned and get more knowledge on this. You have made this awareness to the people who have never known about this conversation. We hope the implementation will be made one day as we continue talking about it, so that people with disability should not give up. Thank you for watching this program. I hope it has given you more interest and more knowledge to know about issues about persons with disability and the Act 2025. So we want to bring the Act of Inclusion. So we have brought this information so that you can share with people and the community. So my name is Sheila. Thank you.